A Universe in a Single Mind, the legacy and life of Ibn Sina, in the hallowed halls of Europe's nascent universities, from the Sorbonne in Paris to the medical schools of Bologna and Padua, a book bound in thick leather became an object of near sacred reverence for over 600 years. It was not a holy text, nor was it the work of a local scholar. Its pages, dense with the systematic logic of healing, were the legacy of a man who had lived and died centuries earlier and a world away in the heart of Persia. This monumental work, Al-Qanun fil Tibt, or the Canon of Medicine, was the intellectual bedrock upon which Western medicine was built. Students swore oaths upon it before their examinations. Physicians consulted it as their ultimate authority. The name of its author, translated and Latinized, echoed through the lecture halls, Avicenna. But who was this man, whose intellect could bridge civilizations and centuries? How did a physician from the turbulent 11th century Islamic Golden Age become the prince of physicians for a continent that was, in many ways, his cultural and religious rival? The answer is not merely a story of a brilliant doctor, but a journey into the mind of a true polymath, a philosopher, astronomer, logician, and poet whose life was a relentless pursuit of a single, grand ambition: to map the entirety of human knowledge into one coherent, interconnected system. His story begins not with his birth, but with the very structure of his thought, a mind that saw the universe not as a collection of disparate facts, but as a single, divinely ordered reality, accessible through the unwavering application of reason. To understand Avicenna is to understand a man who sought to heal not only the body with medicine, but the mind with philosophy, believing both to be reflections of the same cosmic harmony. His life was a testament to the idea that even in an age of political chaos, exile, and persecution, the human intellect could construct a cathedral of knowledge, a sanctuary of order that would outlast empires. The crucible in which this extraordinary mind was forged was not a place of quiet contemplation, but a home alive with the vibrant intellectual currents of its time. Born as Abu Ali al-Husayn ibn Abdullah ibn Sina around the year 980 in the village of Afshana, near Bukhara, then the glittering capital of the Samanid Empire, his earliest education was an immersion in debate and discovery. His father, Abdullah, a respected government official from the ancient city of Balkh, was a follower of Ismailism, a branch of Shia Islam with a deep engagement in Neoplatonic philosophy and esoteric interpretation. Their home was less a domestic space and more a salon, a nightly gathering point for scholars, theologians, and mathematicians of various schools. Imagine a young boy, not yet 10, sitting quietly in the corner, the air thick with the scent of oil lamps and the sound of passionate arguments about the nature of the soul, the geometry of the heavens, the paradoxes of time, and the essence of the divine mind. While other children learned games, Hussein learned the architecture of logic. This environment acted as a powerful catalyst for his innate genius. By the age of 5, he had memorized the Quran, a feat of memory but also of deep linguistic immersion. By 10, he was fluent in both the scholarly Arabic and the poetic Persian, moving seamlessly between scientific texts and literary works. When the family relocated to the metropolis of Bukhara, a beacon of learning often called one of the great centres of the Islamic world, his formal education began, but it would be comically brief. His father hired a renowned tutor, al-Natili, to instruct the boy in logic and geometry, presenting him with the foundational works of Euclid and Aristotle. The arrangement quickly became inverted. Al-Natili would pose a problem, and the young Ibn Sina would not only solve it but often point out logical flaws in the master's explanation, or propose more elegant, streamlined proofs. Within months, the student had far surpassed the teacher, and by his early teens he was a self-directed scholar, teaching others while continuing his own voracious consumption of knowledge. He later recounted his method. He would not sleep until he had mastered something new, often waking in the dead of night, compelled by a difficult problem to light a lamp and continue his work. His intellectual appetite was boundless, but it was not without its frustrations. He famously read Aristotle's Metaphysics 40 times, committing the words to memory, yet the core meaning remained stubbornly elusive, a locked door he could not open. The breakthrough came not from brute force but from a moment of serendipity. he stumbled upon a short commentary by the earlier philosopher Al-Farabi in a marketplace. In a few concise pages, Al-Farabi provided the key, and the entire complex structure of Aristotelian thought clicked into place with blinding clarity. This experience became a cornerstone of his intellectual identity, teaching him that knowledge required not just accumulation, but also the right perspective, the correct interpretive lens. It was during this period of intense self-education that he turned his attention to medicine. Initially, he viewed it as a secondary discipline, less intellectually rigorous than pure philosophy or logic. However, he soon realized its unique demands. Medicine was the ultimate synthesis. It required the encyclopedic memory of a scholar, the keen observational skills of a naturalist, and the deductive reasoning of a logician. It was philosophy made practical, logic applied to the fragile mechanics of the human body. Before he was 16, he began to practice, and his reputation spread like wildfire through Bukhara. He treated the poor and the wealthy alike, his approach a stark contrast to the superstition and mysticism that often passed for healing. He did not rely on charms or incantations. He observed, he listened, he correlated symptoms, and he considered the whole person, their diet, their climate, their emotional state. During an epidemic, he insisted on the isolation of the sick and the cleaning of their clothes and utensils, a rudimentary but revolutionary understanding of contagion, a concept he would later formalize in his masterwork, arguing that diseases could be transmitted by minute creatures through air and touch, centuries before the germ theory of disease. At 16, he was no longer just a prodigy. He was a force, a name whispered in the halls of power, and soon that name would be spoken in a moment of crisis, when the ruler of the empire himself lay on the brink of death. The event that catapulted the teenage Ibn Sina from local prodigy to a figure of courtly importance was a medical crisis at the highest level of the Samanid state. The emir, Nuh ibn Mansur, was afflicted by a severe illness that baffled his team of experienced court physicians. As their conventional remedies failed and the ruler's condition worsened, a desperate court official suggested a gamble: summon the brilliant young man whose diagnostic skills were becoming legendary in Bukhara. The arrival of a 16-year-old boy at the royal bedside was met with predictable scorn and disbelief from the elder doctors, yet the emir, weakened and desperate, consented to an examination. Ibn Sina's approach was methodical and holistic. He didn't just look at the symptoms, he investigated the entire context of the ruler's life. He took the pulse, not as a single beat, but as a complex rhythm telling a story. He examined the tongue, inquired about diet, sleep patterns, and recent emotional upheavals. His diagnosis was swift and confident, a rare combination of severe nervous exhaustion compounded by a digestive ailment. The prescription was not a magical elixir, but a carefully considered regimen of rest, a specific diet, and an infusion of medicinal herbs. Within days, the emir's health began to improve, and within a week he was recovering. The reward for this astonishing success was far more valuable than gold. Ibn Sina was granted unlimited access to the royal library of the Samanids, one of the most magnificent collections of knowledge in the entire Islamic world, rivaled perhaps only by the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. For Ibn Sina, this was like being given the keys to the universe. The library was a treasure trove of human thought, containing translations of Greek masters like Hippocrates, Plato, and his beloved Aristotle, alongside the works of Persian, Indian, and Arab scholars in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. He spent countless hours, days, and nights within its walls, not merely reading, but synthesizing. He was a weaver of ideas, taking threads from Greek natural philosophy, Islamic theology, and clinical medical practice, and creating a new, unified tapestry of knowledge. It was here, amidst the silent scrolls and codices, that the grand vision for his life's work began to form, to create a universal classification of the sciences, a logical system that could connect the physical and the spiritual, the particular and the universal. However, this golden era of stability and scholarly bliss was tragically short-lived. The late 10th century saw the once mighty Samanid Empire crumbling from within and without. Political infighting, economic decay, and the relentless pressure of Turkic tribes from the Central Asian steppes eroded the dynasty's power. In 969, The Karakhanids, a new Turkic dynasty, swept down from the north and conquered Bukhara. The Samanid dynasty fell, Emir Nuh ibn Mansur was deposed, and in the ensuing chaos the magnificent library, Ibn Sina's intellectual sanctuary, was likely scattered or destroyed. Overnight he lost his patron, his home, and most devastatingly his access to the world of books. This marked the beginning of a new, harsh chapter in his life, the life of a wanderer. He left Bukhara and began a long, perilous journey across the vast region of Khorasan, an area encompassing parts of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. For years he was an itinerant scholar, moving from city to city, seeking both shelter and the opportunity to continue his work. His medical expertise became his currency. In Jurjan, he met the great scholar al-Biruni, another towering intellect of the age. Their encounter sparked a famous and fruitful correspondence, a high-level debate on physics, philosophy, and astronomy that showcased the intellectual vibrancy of the era, even as the political landscape fractured. Al-Biruni, known for his rigorous skepticism, would later critique some of Avicenna's more metaphysical ideas, but their dialogue was a meeting of intellectual titans. Wherever he went, his reputation as a healer preceded him. He was invited to the courts of local emirs, consulted on difficult cases, and sought out by the sick from all walks of life. His method, grounded in observation, logic, and a cautious, evidence-based approach to treatment, continued to impress. He saw health not merely as the absence of disease, but as a state of equilibrium between the body, mind, and soul, often accompanying his treatments with philosophical discourse. He found temporary stability in Ray, serving the Buyid dynasty, where he began to dictate the first chapters of his future masterpiece, the Book of Healing. True to his method, he composed vast, complex sections of the work entirely from memory, without drafts, speaking the polished text aloud to his students. But political instability was a constant shadow. Forced to flee Ray, he found refuge in Hamadan, only to be caught in the crossfire of court intrigue. Mistrusted by the military faction, he was arrested and thrown into prison. Yet even there, in a cold, damp cell, his intellectual furnace never ceased to burn. According to his student, he composed dozens of treatises on logic, physics, and metaphysics during his confinement. His mind, a portable library that no conqueror could destroy. After his release, he set out once more, this time for Isfahan, a city that would finally offer him a decade of relative peace and become the backdrop for the culmination of his life's work. By his early 30s, Ibn Sina was no longer just a scholar. He was a symbol of intellectual resilience, a philosopher-physician forged in the fires of chaos. Upon his arrival in Isfahan, Ibn Sina was a man whose reputation had transcended the confines of any single city or court. He was known throughout the Islamic world as a figure of immense intellectual power, his journey marked by decades of wandering, service to feuding dynasties, political intrigue, narrow escapes, and an unwavering dedication to his scholarly mission. The city of Isfahan, under the rule of Ala al-Dawla of the Kakuyid dynasty, became his long-sought haven. The ruler was a patron of the arts and sciences, a man who understood the value of knowledge and deeply respected Ibn Sina's abilities. He was appointed as the court physician and a trusted advisor, a position that finally provided him with the resources and security to focus on his monumental projects. During these Isfahan years, his closest companion was his devoted student and biographer, Abu Ubaid al-Juzjani. It is through al-Juzjani's meticulous records that we have an intimate portrait of the man behind the legend. Al-Juzjani was more than a scribe. He was a confidant, a caretaker, and the guardian of his master's legacy. He documented Ibn Sina's work habits, his moments of inspiration, his struggles with illness, and the sheer force of his intellectual stamina. Ibn Sina was a creature of the night. He found clarity in the deep silence after midnight, often working alone in a library or garden, pacing and pondering a problem for hours before beginning to dictate. Al-Juzjani described a mesmerizing process. Ibn Sina would speak in a steady, measured flow, composing complex philosophical arguments and detailed medical classifications as if reading from a completed text that existed only in his mind. If interrupted, he could pause for an extended period and then resume at the exact point he left off, the thread of his logic unbroken. Even when racked with the severe abdominal pains that would plague his later years, he would continue his work, dictating while lying on his side, his voice weakened but his mind as sharp as ever. This period of tranquility, however, was fragile. The rising power of the Ghaznavids to the east posed a constant threat. Isfahan was attacked, and once again, Ibn Sina was forced to flee with his patron. During the hasty retreat, a portion of his manuscripts was lost or looted, a devastating blow. Yet, the most critical library, the one housed within his memory, remained intact. He accompanied Ala al-Dawla on military campaigns, transforming from a court scholar into a field physician. In the Spartan environment of a military tent surrounded by the clamour of war, he treated wounded soldiers, advised generals, and continued to dictate chapters of his philosophical works. This experience further solidified his view of knowledge as a unified system. He saw the logic of strategy, the biology of a wound, the physics of a siege engine, and the metaphysical questions of life and death as interconnected parts of a single reality. It was during this tumultuous period that his philosophical system reached its final, mature form. He argued for the immortality of the soul as a non-material substance, independent of the body. He posited that the human intellect was a reflection of a higher universal intellect, and that the cosmos was an ordered hierarchy of existence, with every being striving toward its own perfection. He differentiated between sensory, rational, and intuitive levels of cognition, insisting that true wisdom came from the union of reason and moral virtue. These ideas were radical, and often placed him in direct conflict with orthodox theologians. His assertion of the pre-eternity of the world and his concept of God as the necessary existent, a logical necessity rather than a personal volitional creator, were seen by many as heretical. Critics accused him of prioritizing Greek rationalism over divine revelation. He was forced to defend his views in heated public debates, and several times had to flee cities where religious authorities turned rulers against him. His arrest in Hamadan was the most dramatic example of this conflict, a direct result of accusations of heresy, yet his response to persecution was not silence, but an explosion of productivity, as if the pressure of confinement only served to concentrate his intellectual energy. He was a man living on the knife's edge, his fame and his infamy growing in equal measure. He was hailed as al-Sheikh al-Rais, the chief master, and the second Aristotle, yet he saw himself simply as a servant of truth, tasked with organizing and transmitting knowledge. This period of struggle and relentless creation was the final forge, shaping the two pillars of his legacy, the canon of medicine and the book of healing. The masterwork that would make Avicenna's name immortal in the history of medicine was not composed in the quiet solitude of a university or the collaborative environment of a hospital. The canon of medicine was born on the road, in military encampments, and during brief respites in cities that offered temporary sanctuary. Dictated in fragments from memory to his faithful student Al-Juzjani, its chapters were refined over months of reflection and rewritten during pauses between journeys. This was not merely a book, it was a monumental encyclopedia, a systematic codification of all existing medical knowledge, synthesizing Greek heritage, Hippocrates and Galen, Arab clinical traditions, and Avicenna's own vast personal observations into a single coherent framework. Written in elegant, precise classical Arabic, its structure was a marvel of logic and clarity. For Avicenna, medicine was not to be a collection of anecdotes and recipes. It was to be a rigorous science, founded on first principles, observation, and logical deduction. The canon is organized into 5 books, each a pillar supporting the whole edifice. Book 1 lays the theoretical foundation. It is a treatise on the principles of medicine, discussing the anatomy of the human body, the temperaments, the functions of organs, and the forces, both physical and psychological, that maintain health. Avicenna details the importance of lifestyle, diet, climate, sleep, exercise, in preserving the body's natural equilibrium. Crucially, he emphasizes the powerful connection between emotional states and physical illness, arguing that a physician must understand not just the body's mechanics, but also the passions of the soul that can disrupt them. Book 2 is a comprehensive materia medica, an encyclopedia of simple drugs. It meticulously describes some 800 substances of plant, animal, and mineral origin. Each entry is analysed according to its properties, its hot or cold, wet or dry nature, its potency, its mode of action, and its effect on the body's humours. This was far more than a folk herbal. It was a pioneering attempt to create a rational system of pharmacology, where the prescription of a substance was based on a logical understanding of its properties and its interaction with a specific disease state. Book 3 addresses specific diseases, organised anatomically from head to toe. This section provides a practical guide for the physician, detailing the symptoms, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment for a vast range of ailments. Avicenna devotes significant attention to the art of reading the pulse, identifying numerous variations in its rhythm, strength, and frequency, and correlating them with the condition of specific internal organs, the patient's age, and their temperament. This elevation of pulse diagnosis to an objective clinical tool would become a cornerstone of medical practice for centuries. Book 4 focuses on general illnesses that affect the entire body rather than a single organ, such as fevers, infections, tumours, and poisonings. It also contains extensive sections on public health and preventative medicine, including principles of hygiene, dietetics, and seasonal health regimens. His advice on maintaining health during epidemics was profoundly advanced for its time, positioning the physician not as a passive healer of the sick, but as an active guardian of community health, whose primary duty was to prevent disease before it could occur. Book 5 is a formulary dedicated to the art of compounding complex medicines, mixtures, tinctures, pills, and ointments. Avicenna systematizes the craft of the apothecary, teaching how to combine ingredients to amplify or moderate their effects. He delves into the critical issues of dosage, the sequence of administration, individual tolerance, and drug interactions, transforming the pharmacist from a mechanical recipe follower into a thinking practitioner. Throughout the canon, Avicenna builds upon the legacy of his Greek predecessors, but never follows them blindly. He constantly refines, critiques, and corrects based on his own clinical experience. If an anatomical description from Galen did not match what he observed, he said so. He insisted on empirical observation over slavish adherence to ancient authority. This critical spirit, combined with its systematic organization, is what made the canon so revolutionary. It was swiftly recognized as a masterpiece. By the 12th century, it was translated into Latin in Toledo by Gerard of Cremona and quickly spread throughout Europe's universities, where it remained the definitive medical textbook for over 600 years, enduring through more than 30 printed editions in the early modern era. Its power lay in its unique fusion of scientific rigor, practical applicability, and a profound humanism. Avicenna wrote that a physician must be not only knowledgeable but also patient, attentive, morally upright, and capable of listening with compassion. For him, healing was a dialogue between reason and the body, and the physician was the mediator between nature and the patient. The canon became the apex of medieval medicine because it was ultimately not just a book about diseases, but a book about the human being. While the canon of medicine secured Avicenna's reputation as the preeminent physician of his age, it was his philosophical works that made him a towering and controversial figure, debated and dissected for centuries in both the Islamic world and Christian Europe. Chief among these was Kitab al-Shifa, or the Book of Healing, a colossal philosophical encyclopedia he intended not as a cure for the body, but as a healing for the mind. If the canon was a map of the human body, the Book of Healing was a map of reality itself, a comprehensive guide to logic, natural science, mathematics, and at its apex, metaphysics. This was not a collection of essays, but a complete, self-contained philosophical system. Following an Aristotelian structure, Avicenna begins with logic as the essential tool for thought, proceeds through the sciences of the natural world, and culminates in metaphysics, the study of ultimate reality. Yet, he infused this classical framework with new meaning, drawing not only on Greek thought, but also on Islamic theology, and his own clinical insights into the human psyche. The cornerstone of his metaphysics is the distinction between necessary being and contingent being. The necessary being is that which exists through its own essence and cannot not exist. For Avicenna, this is God. Everything else in the universe, from galaxies to human beings, is contingent, its existence possible but not necessary, brought into actuality by an external cause that ultimately traces back to the one necessary being. In this elegant formulation, God is the first cause of the world, not as a temporal creator who acts in time, but as a timeless logical necessity from which the universe eternally emanates. This doctrine of the world's eternal emanation from God was explosive. It directly challenged the orthodox Islamic doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing at a specific point in time. Orthodox theologians, particularly from the Ash'ari school, fiercely opposed this view, arguing that it limited God's absolute freedom and subjected the divine will to the cold constraints of philosophical logic. Avicenna countered that reason was itself a divine gift, allowing humanity to comprehend the ordered, rational structure of creation and thereby approach an understanding of the Creator's mind. He wrote as a philosopher seeking to understand, not as a theologian demanding faith, and this rational, systematic approach struck many as dangerously independent. Equally influential was his doctrine of the soul. He argued that the human soul is an immaterial substance, created with the body but not dependent on it for its existence or consciousness. To prove this, he devised the famous flying man thought experiment, a classic in the history of philosophy. He asks us to imagine a person created fully formed and conscious, but suspended in a void, deprived of all sensory input, unable to see, hear, or touch, with no awareness of their own limbs. Even in this state of total sensory deprivation, Avicenna argued, the person would still be undeniably aware of their own existence, their own I. Therefore, self-awareness is an intrinsic property of the soul, independent of the body and its senses. It was precisely these positions, the eternity of the world, the autonomous nature of the soul, and the conception of a philosophically comprehensible God that drew the most potent criticism. The great theologian and mystic Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, in his landmark work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, singled out Avicenna and his predecessor al-Farabi for condemnation, accusing them of three grave heresies that placed them outside the bounds of Islam. This was not a simple clash between faith and reason. Rather, it was a profound debate about the limits of reason. Al-Ghazali, drawing on Sufi mystical experience, argued that logic was incapable of penetrating the ultimate mysteries of the divine. Avicenna maintained that reason and revelation were not contradictory but complementary paths to the same truth. This debate would resonate for centuries. When Avicenna's works were translated into Latin, his ideas profoundly shaped European scholasticism. Thinkers like Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and especially Thomas Aquinas engaged deeply with his philosophy. Aquinas adopted and adapted Avicenna's concepts of the rational soul, his classification of knowledge, and his logical proofs for God's existence. Though Aquinas ultimately subordinated philosophy to theology, he cited Avicenna as a major authority, and by the 13th century, Avicenna's name was as familiar as Aristotle's in the universities of Paris and Oxford. He had created a philosophical system of breathtaking scope, one in which God, nature, and the human mind existed in a unified, rational order, a system that sought not to replace faith with reason, but to illuminate it.